Good evening and welcome to News of the World. It's Tuesday, August 4. Tonight we drift slowly across 28 countries, from Tuvalu to Solomon Islands. There's nothing you need to do and nowhere you need to be. Settle in and let the world turn. Tuvalu has been making a quiet push to change where the next Pacific Climate Summit happens, not to move it away but to bring it closer. The idea is simple and deliberate. World leaders should come to Tuvalu and see for themselves what rising seas look like on a frontline nation. For a country made of low-lying atolls, the climate crisis isn't a projection or a future scenario. It's the water lapping higher against the seawall, the king tides that creep further inland each season, the groundwater that turns brackish. Tuvalu wants the people making decisions to stand on that ground and feel it under their feet. There's something steady and unembarrassed about the request. Not a plea for sympathy, but an invitation to witness. The Pacific has long hosted summits where climate policy is debated in air-conditioned rooms, far from the shorelines most at risk. Tuvalu is asking that this time, the conversation happen where the consequences already are. If you're still with me, picture that. Leaders arriving on a narrow atoll, the ocean on all sides, the horizon close enough to seem like the edge of something. It's a small country asking a large world to come closer, not to hear another speech, but to see what's already here. And in the warm quiet of a Pacific evening, that invitation carries its own weight. Haiti has been waiting for help that keeps being promised but is slow to arrive. A U.S. envoy has asked other countries to help fly troops into Haiti for a UN-backed security force, the kind of request that tells you the mission exists on paper but is still struggling to become real on the ground. The force is meant to help stabilize a country where armed groups hold significant parts of the capital, Port-au-Prince, and where ordinary life has been shaped by that insecurity for a long time now. What the envoy is asking for is practical, planes, coordination, the logistics of moving people across distances. It isn't glamorous work, but without it, nothing else moves. And for Haitians living inside that uncertainty, the difference between a plan and a plane ticket is everything. There is something quietly striking about a country's safety depending on whether other nations can sort out their transport arrangements. It puts the fragility of the moment into very plain terms. Haiti has been here before, waiting for international help, weighing what it means, hoping it arrives in time to matter, whether these troops will come and what they will find when they do, and whether they will bring the calm that has been promised that is still ahead. For now, the request has been made, and somewhere, the answers are being considered. South Africa has a new land law, and this week it met its first real test in court. The law deals with a question the country has been carrying for a long time: how to address the deep inequalities left by apartheid when so much land still sits in so few hands. The legislation was meant to offer a careful, legal path toward change. But it drew attention far beyond South Africa's borders. The Trump administration objected to it loudly, and investor confidence wavered. Now the country's biggest coalition partner has asked the courts to scrap the law entirely, arguing it goes too far or moves too fast. The details of the challenge are still unfolding. What's striking is how many currents meet here. A question about soil and belonging becomes a diplomatic flashpoint, a market signal, a political fault line inside a young coalition government. And yet for many South Africans, this has always been a quieter, older story about land that was taken, land that was never returned, and the patience required to keep asking. The court will take its time. Courts do. And outside the courtroom, the land itself remains patient and vast, holding the weight of a history that South Africa is still learning how to carry forward. If you're still with me, we'll move on soon. But for now, let the courtroom settle into its work and let South Africa hold this one close. Afghanistan has been living under Taliban rule for roughly 5 years now, and the picture human rights groups are drawing is not getting brighter. The humanitarian crisis there has intensified. They say not in a single dramatic moment, but slowly, steadily, the way deep hardship often does. Food insecurity, restricted movement, shrinking space for women and girls to live public lives. These are the threads the reports pull together. It's worth remembering that Afghanistan is a country of some 40 million people, many of them young, many of them rural, and the weight of these years sits differently on each life. A rights group this week described what it called an assault on rights deepening over time, a phrase that carries the quiet exhaustion of people who have seen promises broken and doors close one by one. There are other stories from Afghanistan, if you're still with me. A futsal team preparing to face Vietnam in a continental match. Cricket tours planned for Ireland. Small signs that ordinary life keeps reaching for ordinary things, even under extraordinary pressure. And there's the matter of countries like Germany widening deportations back to Afghanistan, a reminder that the world beyond its borders is still deciding what Afghanistan's future means for its own people. But tonight, the story worth carrying is the one about endurance, about a country where the crisis isn't a headline that arrives and passes. It's the weather people wake up to and make breakfast in and send their children out into, and still somehow the days continue. Gambia is a narrow country, hugging the river that shares its name, never more than about 30 miles wide from north to south. Most Gambians live close to that water, and most of them work in something connected to the land. So when the ECOWAS Bank for Investment and Development puts $10 million into expanding what are called G-farms, it is the kind of story that reaches into ordinary kitchens. The money is meant to boost food security, a phrase that can sound abstract until you remember what it actually means. It means families not wondering whether rice will be affordable next month. It means children eating regularly through the lean season before the harvest arrives. Gambia imports a good portion of what it eats, which leaves the country exposed when global prices jump or supply chains falter. Expanding domestic farming does not fix everything overnight, but it shifts the balance even slightly towards self-reliance. The investment from EBID is regional money, West African institutions backing West African soil, and there is something steady about that. It is not charity arriving from far away. It is neighbors investing in neighbors. If you're still with me, hold that image for a moment. Tractors moving through fields along the Gambia River, workers planting in rows that stretch toward the horizon, a country feeding itself one season at a time. It is a quiet kind of progress, the sort that does not make much noise but changes what is on the table when evening comes. Equatorial Guinea sits at the western edge of Central Africa, small in size but part of a larger regional story that moves quietly through the banking system most people never think about. The country belongs to CEMAC, the economic community that binds 6 Central African nations together and shares a central bank, the Bank of Central African States, known by its French initials BAE. This week, BAC validated a plan to unify payments across the region using a single QR code. It sounds technical, and it is, but the meaning is simpler than the machinery. A merchant in Malabo or in any CEMAC city could accept a payment from a customer whose bank is based in another member country, and the transaction would move through one shared standard rather than a tangle of incompatible systems. For people who live and trade across these borders, that matters. Central Africa has long dealt with the friction of moving money between neighbors who share a currency, but not always the same payment rails. A regional QR code won't solve everything, and no one is claiming it will. But it represents a kind of quiet infrastructure, the sort of thing that works best when you stop noticing it. Equatorial Guinea, with its position on the coast and its ties to the broader CEMAC framework, stands to be part of that easing. Somewhere in Malabo, a shopkeeper may soon scan a code from a visitor's phone and not think twice about which country issued the card behind it. That small absence of friction is its own kind of progress. South Sudan is a young country, barely more than a decade old, and much of its story so far has been told through conflict and hardship. But these days, there's a quieter thread worth noticing, one about building, about the slow work of an economy finding its feet. The country's Oil and Power Conference has returned, positioned as South Sudan's premier platform for investment. It's a gathering meant to draw attention and capital toward the energy sector, which remains the backbone of the national economy. For a nation where infrastructure is still fragile and where electricity reaches only a fraction of the population, the simple act of inviting investors in, of saying, "Come and look at what's here," carries a particular kind of hope. Oil has long been South Sudan's greatest resource and its greatest complication, tangled up in politics and in the relationships with its neighbors. So a forum like this isn't only about deals and pipelines. It's about a country trying to present itself as a place where things can be built, where power can literally be switched on in more homes, where the ground beneath people's feet might translate into something steadier than survival. If you're still with me, you might sit with that image for a moment. A conference hall in Juba, voices in several languages, plans drawn on paper that may or may not hold. Nothing grand, nothing finished. Just the sound of a young country asking the world to consider what comes next. Uganda has a story this week that begins with dancing and ends with something that feels like a door opening. A group known as the Ghetto Kids, young dancers from Kampala's streets, have made history at a World Cup event, becoming the first from their country to reach that stage. "Dreams do come true," they said afterward, and you can understand why those words mattered so much. These are children who learn to dance not in studios but in courtyards and lanes, in neighborhoods where opportunity doesn't exactly announce itself. What they built was something from almost nothing: rhythm, discipline, and the kind of trust that comes from moving together as one. To reach a world stage from there is not a small thing. It means someone was watching, and that what they saw was enough to believe in. Uganda has known harder stories this season: outbreaks at its borders, questions raised about freedoms, the weight of old history revisited at Entebbe. But tonight, if you're still with me, consider the dancers. Consider what it means for a country when its children step forward and the world leans in to watch. The Ghetto Kids carried something with them onto that stage, a reminder that talent doesn't ask permission, and that a beginning in the ghetto is still a beginning, that sits gently in the night, like a breath held and then let go. Uzbekistan has been quietly advancing plans for its first nuclear power plant, a project that would mark a significant shift for a country long known for its cotton fields, its Silk Road cities, and the vast stretch of the Kizilkum Desert at its heart. The details remain limited, but the direction is clear. Uzbekistan is serious about nuclear energy, and the project has moved another step forward. For a nation that still relies heavily on natural gas for electricity, this is not a small thing. It is a bet on a different kind of future, one where power comes from something other than what has always been pulled from the ground. There is something worth pausing on here. Nuclear power carries its own weight of questions, and Uzbekistan is no stranger to the complicated legacy of radiation in Central Asia. But the choice tells you something about how the country sees itself in the decades to come. Not just as a producer of textiles and fuel, though it is both of those things, but as something more. A place thinking about energy independence, about industry, about what it means to plan for a generation that has not yet grown up. If you have ever traveled through Uzbekistan, you know the landscape holds a kind of stillness that makes ambition feel both improbable and entirely natural. The nuclear project is still taking shape, but it is advancing, and that alone is worth noticing tonight. El Salvador has been living through a strange kind of quiet these days. For years, the country was defined by its gang violence, one of the most dangerous places on earth, People used to say, without much exaggeration, now the streets are calmer. The government has handed down extraordinary sentences, over 1,000 years in some cases, to gang members. Mega-prisons have risen to hold them, and the question being asked, gently but insistently, is whether calm is the same thing as peace. An economics observatory put it plainly: is lower crime enough? It is not a small question. Crime falling changes everything for a neighborhood. Children walk to school again, shops stay open past dark, people plan for next year instead of just next week. But development, real development, asks for more than the absence of fear. It asks for work that pays, schools that hold, a court system people trust. El Salvador has steadied itself in a way that would have seemed unimaginable a decade ago. Whether that steadiness deepens into something lasting or simply rests on the weight of its prisons is a story still being written. Somewhere in that country tonight, a family is sitting on a porch that used to feel too dangerous to sit on. That matters. What comes next matters too. And if you're still with me, we will let that question sit for a moment before we move on. Montenegro has been quietly tending to the architecture of its state. The government has revised its laws on internal affairs and on the security agency, and the European Union has welcomed the changes. The details are not fully known beyond that, but the gesture itself tells you something. Montenegro is a small country on the Adriatic, fewer than 700,000 people, and for years now it has been working its way toward European Union membership. That path is long and technical, and it often comes down to documents like these. Laws governing internal affairs and security services are not the kind of thing that fills streets or headlines. But they matter. They shape how a country protects its people, how intelligence is gathered and overseen, how power is held accountable. When the EU says it welcomes such revisions, it is signaling that Montenegro is moving in a direction Brussels recognizes. For the people of Montenegro, this is not abstract. It is part of a larger conversation about where their country belongs, about whether its institutions can be trusted to do their work transparently. And that conversation does not happen in a single moment. It happens in revisions, in drafts, in the slow turning of policy into practice. If you're still with me, just hold that image for a moment. A small country, revising its laws, and a larger community across the water saying yes, that is the right direction. It is not dramatic, but it is steady. And sometimes steady is exactly what carries a country forward into the night. North Korea finds itself these days surrounded by neighbors quietly rearranging their expectations. South Korea, which for years has insisted that Pyongyang give up its nuclear weapons before anything else moves forward, has been stepping away from that denuclearization first position. It's a subtle shift, but for anyone watching from Pyongyang, it changes the shape of the room. The question being asked in capitals near and far is what North Korea does next, whether it reads the opening as a chance to talk or simply as confirmation that patience has worked. Meanwhile, the country has been pouring concrete along its northern border. Analysts describe it less as a conventional military line and more as a wall, something designed to keep people in as much as to keep threats out. The imagery is hard to miss, and the intent behind it feels settled. There are other threads pulling at the edges too. The United States and its partners have issued warnings about North Korean cyber activity, which Pyongyang has dismissed as baseless slander. Russia's long-discussed bridge project connecting the two countries appears to be unraveling. And a decade-old American travel ban that once seemed permanent is now drawing second looks, with former diplomats arguing it hurts the very aid workers trying to help. For ordinary people in North Korea, none of this arrives as news in the way we might recognize it. It arrives slowly, in the texture of daily life. What's available, what's restricted, what the neighbors are saying. If you're still with me, sit with that for a moment. A country can be talked about endlessly by others and still keep its own counsel waiting. In Bolivia, the month of August belongs to Pachamama, Mother Earth. And across the country, families and communities have begun the quiet rituals that come with it. This is the season when people prepare offerings, small and careful, to give thanks and ask for well-being in the year ahead. The offerings often include coca leaves, seeds, sweets, and other items gathered with intention, placed into the ground or into a flame in a gesture of reciprocity. It's an ancient practice rooted in indigenous Andean cosmology, and it continues not as performance but as something woven into daily life. The idea at its center is simple and profound. The earth gives, and so one gives back. In a country where indigenous traditions have shaped politics, culture, and identity so deeply, Pachamama isn't a symbol kept behind glass. It's a living relationship, renewed each year with hands and smoke and whispered intentions. You might see it in a household courtyard in El Alto, or in a ceremony on the Altiplano where the air is thin and the sky feels close. There's no spectacle to it, usually, just people pausing to acknowledge what holds them up. And in Bolivia these days, that pause carries a particular weight, a reminder that the land is not merely a resource, but something older and more deserving of care. If you're still with me, hold that image for a moment. Smoke rising in the highland air, and somewhere beneath it, the earth receiving what it's given. Gabon has secured a 7-year Eurobond deal worth $920 million, a significant sum for a Central African nation of roughly 2.5 million people, nestled along the Atlantic coast where the Congo Basin rainforest meets the sea. For a country whose economy has long rested on oil and timber, raising that kind of money on international markets is a statement of intent. It says Gabon wants to keep building, even as the ground beneath sovereign credit ratings shifts. The country has faced a downgrade recently, and that tells us something quiet but important about how creditworthiness is judged, not just by what a nation earns, but by how institutions perform, how debt is managed, how trust is rebuilt after political change. Gabon has been through a transition of leadership, and the financial world watches those moments closely. Meanwhile, the African Development Bank is working alongside Gabonese public sector teams to strengthen how projects are planned and delivered. The unglamorous work that turns borrowed money into roads, schools, power lines. And beyond finance, Gabon is reaching out. The president has been traveling, a state visit to Sierra Leone, new cooperation accords signed with Gambia, small but steady threads being woven into stronger bilateral ties across the continent. If you're still with me, consider what it means for a country to borrow not just for survival, but for a future it can see. The Eurobond matures in 7 years. Between now and then, Gabon will be writing its answer. Cambodia has done something with HIV that's worth pausing to notice. The details are modest in the telling, a headline, a recognition, but the story behind them is one of patience and follow-through. In a region where HIV once spread quickly and quietly, Cambodia chose to meet the problem directly. That meant not just treatment, but prevention, not just policy, but the unglamorous work of reaching people who are often hardest to reach. What seems to have set Cambodia apart is consistency. Not a single dramatic intervention, but a sustained effort, the kind that doesn't make for dramatic headlines year after year, yet slowly changes the shape of a country's health. Public health workers know this rhythm well. The work is slow, the progress is real, and it asks something steady of the people doing it. If you're still with me, consider what it means for a country to be cited not for crisis, but for getting something right. Cambodia's story with HIV isn't finished. These things never quite are. But it stands as a reminder that quiet, persistent care can reshape a nation's future. Somewhere in Cambodia tonight, there are health workers and ordinary people whose choices made this possible. They probably won't be celebrated widely, but the evidence of their work is there, in lives continued, in infections that never happened. And that is enough to carry into the night. Belarus is building something new, about 40 kilometers from its border with Ukraine. The country is forming its 4th Airborne Assault Brigade, a unit of soldiers trained to move quickly, by air, into difficult terrain. A permanent base for the brigade is planned to be ready by 2027, which gives the project a slow, deliberate shape. It is not a sudden mobilization, it is something being assembled over years in flat countryside that has seen armies come and go before. For Belarus, this is a continuation of a military expansion that has been quietly underway for some time. The country already had 3 such brigades. A 4th, placed this close to Ukraine, carries its own weight of meaning in a region where borders are watched carefully and memories of recent conflict are still fresh. The land between Belarus and Ukraine is quiet farmland and forest, crossed by rivers and old roads. It does not look like a frontier of tension, but the map tells its own story. Neighboring countries have been watching Belarus closely, and this new brigade will give them something more to consider. What the soldiers will do there day to day is the ordinary work of any garrison: training, maintaining equipment, settling into a place that will become home for them and their families. By 2027, the base will stand as a more permanent feature of that landscape. For now, it is a plan taking shape, a line on an organizational chart slowly becoming concrete and barracks on the ground. The fields around it will keep their silence, and the seasons will turn as they always have over that quiet borderland. Latvia has been thinking carefully about what it means to stand on its own feet. The country's president has been urging Latvians to build up their own defense production, not as a gesture of alarm, but as a matter of quiet, practical readiness. A small nation on the eastern edge of the European Union, Latvia has watched the war in Ukraine with particular attention, and the lesson it draws is that a country should be able to look after itself. That means making things, maintaining things, and not relying entirely on others for the tools of its own security. It's a sober conversation, but not a panicked one. Meanwhile, Latvia has closed a border crossing with Belarus, and the government in Minsk has responded with talk of asymmetrical measures, diplomatic language for something unspecified and unwelcome. It's the kind of friction that reminds you how close the geography really is. And yet, alongside all of this, Latvia has been quietly expanding something else. It's been taking in wounded Ukrainian soldiers for treatment and plans to double that effort. Hospitals, rehabilitation, time to heal, offered to people who've already given a great deal. So there are 2 things happening at once, really. A country tightening its borders and building its own strength, and the same country reaching outward to help mend what's been broken. If you're still with me, that's worth holding on to. The idea that vigilance and care can live in the same place, without contradiction. Burundi has turned a page in a long, quiet struggle against an old disease. The World Health Organization has recognized that Burundi has eliminated trachoma as a public health problem, a milestone that means the disease no longer hangs over communities the way it once did. Trachoma is a bacterial infection of the eye, and it spreads where clean water is scarce and living conditions are crowded. Left untreated, it scars the inside of the eyelid, and over years the lashes turn inward, scratching the cornea until sight fades. It is one of the oldest infectious causes of blindness known to medicine, and it has always sat hardest on the poorest places. So to hear that Burundi has brought it to heal, that is not a small thing. It means years of work that probably did not make many headlines. Screening in remote communities, training health workers, getting antibiotics to the places where roads thin out, and teaching the simple prevention that clean faces and clean water make possible. None of that happens in a single dramatic moment. It happens slowly, village by village, eye by eye. Burundi is a small country in the African Great Lakes region, densely populated with hills that crowd down to the shores of Lake Tanganyika. It is a place where public health challenges are real and resources are stretched thin, which makes this achievement worth pausing over. A disease that once quietly stole people's sight has been pushed back far enough that it no longer threatens a nation's health. If you're still with me, just hold that thought for a moment. Somewhere in the hills of Burundi, a child will grow up without ever knowing what trachoma could have done. And that is a kind of freedom too. Mexico's Caribbean coast has long been one of those places people dream about: turquoise water, white sand, the kind of shoreline that seems almost too beautiful to be real. But these days, something less picturesque has been washing ashore. Great masses of seaweed, brown and heavy, drifting in from the open Atlantic and piling up on the beaches. It's called sargassum, and it's been arriving in larger and larger quantities, turning postcard coastlines into something more like a tangle. The smell alone is enough to change a town. Mexico's president has now unveiled a plan to fight back, a national effort to clear the seaweed before it can choke the beaches and the livelihoods that depend on them. The details of the plan are still emerging, but the intention is clear enough. Coastal communities in places like Quintana Roo, where tourism is the heartbeat of the local economy, have been watching this problem creep closer for years. Fishermen, hotel workers, small business owners, all of them living with the rhythm of the tides and whatever the tides bring in. If you've ever stood on a beach at dawn and watched the waves deliver something unexpected, you know how quickly the familiar can shift. What Mexico is attempting now is something stubborn and hopeful to push back against something the ocean itself is sending, and maybe that's the part worth holding on to tonight. Not the scale of the problem, but the willingness to meet it. Azerbaijan has been an oil land for a long time, longer than most people remember. The Caspian Sea, that great body of water stretched along the country's eastern edge, has held oil beneath its floor for ages, and the Azeri Chirag Ganashli field out there is one of the largest the Caspian has ever given up. People in the industry just call it ACG. This week, Azerbaijan's state oil company, SOCAR, increased its stake in that field. The details aren't fully public yet, but the meaning is straightforward enough. A country that has always drawn its living from these waters is choosing to hold a little more of them in its own hands. If you've never been to Baku, it sits right on the Caspian coast, a city where old stone buildings and new glass towers look out over the same water where the rigs work. The oil business there is not abstract. It is jobs and pensions and roads and schools, and it has shaped the country's identity for more than a century now. What SOCAR's move suggests is a quiet kind of confidence. A government that sees long value in the ground beneath the sea and wants a larger share of what comes out of it. There is nothing dramatic in the announcement. No crisis, no surprise. Just a country leaning a little closer to something it already knows well, settling a little deeper into its place on the water, and the Caspian, as always, keeps its own counsel underneath it all. Brazil is a country that treats its politics like weather, always there, always shifting, felt in everything. And this week, the political season turned again. President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has formally launched his bid for another term in office. He's a familiar figure in Brazilian life, someone who has been at the center of the country's story for decades. His return to the presidency was already a chapter full of twists, and now he's asking voters to keep him there a while longer. What makes the road ahead interesting is who else is gathering on it. Polls have been showing Flavio Bolsonaro, son of Lula's old rival, former President Jair Bolsonaro, closing the gap. That name carries a whole current of Brazilian politics with it, and the narrowing numbers suggest the contest won't be quiet. Brazil is enormous, restless, deeply regional. A farmer in Mato Grosso and a student in Salvador may read the same headline and feel entirely different things. That's the nature of a country this vast. Nearly 216 million people spread across a continent-sized land, arguing together somehow about where to go next. The campaign will unfold across months, through cities and small towns, across rivers and plateaus. For now, the starting pistol has sounded. If you're still with me, just hold that image for a moment, a country breathing in before the long conversation of an election year. Nothing decided yet. Everything still open. Armenia has begun a new political chapter. Nikol Pashinyan has been reappointed as prime minister following elections that gave his party a renewed mandate to govern. The country's new parliament has held its first session, and the opposition, as had been expected, made its presence felt from the outset. There is something steadying about watching a legislature fill its seats and settle into the work of disagreement. It means the argument moves indoors, into rooms designed for it. Ruben Yon, who has served as Armenia's chief negotiator with Turkey, was elected speaker of the new parliament. That detail is worth pausing on. The person now tasked with keeping order among Armenia's lawmakers is the same person who has been quietly carrying delicate conversations with a neighbor Armenia has long regarded with wariness. It suggests a government thinking about more than one thing at once. These are not dramatic days in Yerevan, and perhaps that is the point. After years of upheaval, of war and protest, and the hard reckoning that follows both, a parliament convening and a prime minister taking his seat again can feel almost ordinary. But ordinary in a young democracy is not nothing. It is the sound of institutions doing their work while the country watches. If you're still with me, hold Armenia in mind tonight. A small country in a difficult neighborhood, trying to let its politics be politics and its future be something it chooses for itself. Cameroon, like much of Central Africa, has been building fast these past few years. Roads, ports, housing, the bones of a country still growing into itself, and one of the quiet questions behind all that construction is who actually does the work and who learns enough to carry it forward. This week, a Chinese company operating in Cameroon launched what it's calling a talent incubator program, aimed at training local people to take part in the country's infrastructure development. The details are spare, but the idea is straightforward enough. Rather than bringing in finished expertise from outside and leaving with it, the program is meant to pass skills along, to build a generation of Cameroonian engineers, technicians, and project hands who can keep the work going long after any single contract ends. It's the kind of story that doesn't make much noise. No ribbon cutting, no crowd. Just a company sitting down with a government and saying, "Let us teach some of your people what we know." In a country where 4 state-owned enterprises carry most of the public debt and where the infrastructure backlog is real, that kind of patient investment matters in ways that won't show up in any single headline. If you're still with me, consider what it means to build a road and also build the people who can build the next one. Cameroon has been doing the first for a while now. The second part takes longer, but it lasts. And somewhere in a classroom or on a site, someone is learning something they'll still have years from now, when the cranes are gone and the road is just a road. Spain holds a small piece of land on the North African coast, not an island, not a military base, but a city, 2 of them in fact. Ceuta and Melilla, surrounded on 3 sides by Morocco and on the 4th by the Mediterranean. They've been Spanish for centuries, long before modern borders were drawn, and they remain part of the European Union, the only European territory on the African mainland. That geography has made them something else entirely, a doorway. In recent weeks, thousands of people crossed into Ceuta from Morocco in a matter of days. Among them were hundreds of children, some traveling alone, stranded in a city not much larger than a town. The reasons behind the surge are tangled: diplomacy between Spain and Morocco, regional tensions, the desperation of people seeking a life across the water, but the result is human and immediate: families waiting in the open. Young people unsure where they'll sleep. Spanish authorities moving quickly to manage a situation that overwhelmed a place built for far fewer. The enclaves have always sat oddly on the map. They are Spanish in language and currency, African in soil and climate, and they carry the weight of both. What happens there rarely stays there. Other European leaders have watched closely, some using the moment to argue for harder borders of their own. But on the ground, in Ceuta, the story is simpler and harder. It's people on a threshold, and a small city trying to hold the line between 2 worlds that have never been as far apart as the maps suggest. Laos has been learning what a railway can do to a country. The Laos-China Railway, which has been carrying passengers and freight across the country for a while now, is getting closer to becoming something larger, a regional link as Thailand moves forward with its own high-speed rail expansion. For Laos, a land that has long been crossed rather than traveled through, the tracks are beginning to feel like they belong to something shared. The line has already reshaped daily life in ways both large and small. Journeys that used to take days now take hours. New jobs have appeared along the route, and the landscape itself, villages, valleys, the slow bend of rivers, is being seen differently now that you can move through it quickly. There is also the harder side. Observers have noted how heavily the corridor reflects Chinese investment and influence, and that conversation is still unfolding. But for people here, the railway is also simply a way to get to work, to visit family, to carry goods to market. It is infrastructure, but it is also time given back. And as the line reaches toward Thailand and the wider region, Laos finds itself connected not just to one neighbor, but to the slow, patient idea of a region that can finally move together. If you are still with me, that is where things stand tonight. A small country watching its rails reach outward and wondering how far the journey goes. Tunisia has always had more than one address. Walk through Tunis and you'll feel it, a country that thinks outward, toward the millions who left and never quite stopped coming back. These days, that relationship is becoming something more than sentiment. Tunisia's diaspora is emerging as a strategic pillar of the country's economic resilience, a quiet backbone at a time when the ground at home is not always steady. The details are still taking shape, but the shape is clear enough. Remittances flow in, families build on them. Small businesses get seeded by someone who left years ago and still keeps a foot in the old neighborhood. It is the kind of economy that doesn't make headlines, no grand announcement, no ribbon to cut, but it holds things together when other things strain, and Tunisia has known strain. Power cuts, water shortages, a tourism sector that keeps trying to offer peace to visitors while struggling to keep the lights on. In that landscape, the people abroad become something more than a lifeline. They become a kind of continuity proof that a country's story doesn't stop at its borders, that resilience can travel and return and travel again. If you're still with me, think of it this way. Somewhere tonight, a Tunisian engineer in Paris is sending money home. A shopkeeper in Marseille is planning a visit. A student in Quebec is already dreaming of the street she grew up on, and back in Tunisia, that quiet current arrives not as rescue, but as something steadier. A reminder that distance, in the right hands, can also be a kind of closeness. New Zealand has done something this week that might surprise you, not because it happened, but because it hadn't happened sooner. Parliament has passed legislation making English an official language, the third one, in fact, for a country where English is what you hear in nearly every school, every shop, every broadcast. That might sound strange. But for decades, New Zealand's official languages were Te Reo Maori and New Zealand Sign Language, both recognized in law, both carrying real weight, while English simply carried on without a formal stamp. It was the language everyone used, but never the one Parliament had formally named. Now that's changed. And the reaction has been, well, mixed. Some have called the move overdue, a simple matter of catching up the law to reality. Others have been less generous, with one description making the rounds as pathetic. The feeling there seems to be that formalizing English was hardly the most pressing thing on the country's mind, and perhaps even a gesture that risks overshadowing the harder, more meaningful work of protecting Te Reo Maori in daily life. It's a small law, but it touches something large, the question of which languages a country chooses to lift up, and what that choice says about who belongs. New Zealand has long carried more than one tongue, more than one story inside its borders. This week it added another line to that record. Whether that line matters much in the morning, or mostly in the history books, is something the people there will work out in their own time. Solomon Islands sits at the western edge of the Pacific, a scattered archipelago where most of life still turns on the sea. These days, that sea is the center of an ambitious idea. Solomon Islands is one of 4 Pacific nations working together on what could become one of the largest ocean corridors anywhere in the world. The details are still taking shape, but the intention is clear and quietly remarkable. These nations want to link their waters into a single protected passage, a corridor wide enough that fish and whales and all the unseen life below can move through it without interruption. It is the kind of plan that sounds simple when you say it aloud, but it asks a great deal of small countries with limited resources and big stretches of ocean to watch over. What makes it worth noticing is the cooperation itself. 4 nations, each with its own coastline and its own concerns, choosing to think of the ocean as something shared rather than something divided. In a part of the world where borders were often drawn by distant powers, there is something steady about neighbors deciding the shape of their own waters. If you're still with me, picture that corridor at night, dark and moving, unlit by anything but the stars above it. A long, quiet road through the sea, kept open by people who live beside it and have decided to keep it that way. And that's the world for tonight. Wherever you are, whatever tomorrow holds, rest easy. The world will keep turning slowly while you sleep, and we'll take another quiet trip around it tomorrow night. Good night.